He had memorized the face of the devil before he even knew how to read, spending 5,475 nights praying for the chance to kill him. Hey friends, welcome. I'm Marcus. Another incredible gladiator story for you today. This isn't just a story about blood and sand, it's about the cost of a human soul. Let me know where you're watching from and please hit that subscribe button. Let's get started. And that for Salas, time didn't move forward, it only circled the drain of a single, horrific memory. He was 25 years old now, a mountain of scarred muscle and cold fury standing in the dark tunnels beneath the Colosseum, but in his mind, he was still 10 years old. He was still hiding under his bed, smelling the acrid smoke of burning tapestries, listening to the wood of his front door splintering under the blow of a battering ram. That night, 15 years ago, wasn't just a tragedy. It was an execution. A corrupt military raid sanctioned by a greedy governor who wanted his father's land. Salas had watched through the slats of his hiding spot as boots, heavy, iron-studded caligy, stomped across the marble floors he used to play on. He saw his father fall. He saw his mother plead. And then he saw the face of the commander. The man wasn't wearing a helmet, he was arrogant enough to show his face to his victims. He had a smile that chilled the marrow of your bones, but it was the scar that branded itself into Salas's soul. A jagged, purple burn mark in the shape of a crescent moon, curving violently up the left side of his neck, pulsing as he laughed. That scar was the last thing Salas saw before the roof collapsed and his world turned to ash. Salas didn't die that night. He crawled out of the ruins, soot-stained and broken, and made a vow that terrified the gods. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't sleep, and he wouldn't rest until he drove a gladius through that crescent moon scar. He sold himself into slavery the next day. Imagine the look on the Lanista's face when a scrawny, burned boy walked into the ludus and demanded to be trained. "I don't want gold," Salas had whispered, his voice raspy from smoke inhalation. "I want to become a weapon," and he did. For 15 years, Salas didn't live, he prepared. You have to picture the grueling, bone-breaking reality of his existence. While other gladiators fought for glory, for women, or for the coin thrown by the crowd, Salas fought for information. He became the Phantom of Capua. He was efficient, brutal, and silent. He never dragged out a fight. He would disarm his opponents, pin them to the sand, and then, before the crowd could even cheer, he would rip off their helmets. He wasn't looking for their eyes. He was checking their necks. He was looking for the mark. Every time he saw smooth skin or a different scar, he would knock them unconscious and walk away, leaving the crowd confused and the Lanista frustrated. He wasn't a performer. He was a hunter checking traps. Then came the announcement of the Emperor's triumph. To celebrate the conquest of Britannia, the Emperor had organized the largest games in Roman history. Gladiators from every province were summoned to the capital. But more importantly, the Emperor's retired generals, the heroes of the empire, were invited to participate in ceremonial duels. When Salas heard the news, he felt a pull in his chest, like a hook snagging his heart. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew he would be there. The tunnel was suffocatingly hot. The roar of 50,000 people vibrated through the stone walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. Salas stood near the gate, his skin oiled, his grip on his heavy shield so tight his knuckles were white. The Lanista, a nervous man named Varro, was chattering in his ear. "Listen to me, Salas. Today is different. You are fighting a legend. General Valerius. He is old, yes, but he is crafty. He requested a challenger from the provinces. He wants an easy win to remind the people of his glory days. Do not kill him quickly. Make it a show. If you embarrass him, the Emperor will have my head." Salas didn't hear him. He was staring at the sliver of blinding white light coming from the arena gate. The announcer's voice boomed like thunder. "Citizens of Rome. Prepare yourselves for a clash of generations. The unbroken shield of the North, the scourge of Britannia, General Valerius, the crowd erupted. It was a sound of adoration. They loved their war heroes. Salas watched as a figure rode into the arena on a white chariot. The man stepped down, raising his arms. He was wearing ceremonial golden armor, a purple cape, and a helmet with a magnificent red crest. He looked every bit the hero Rome believed him to be. But Salas wasn't looking at the armor. He was watching the way the man moved. The arrogance in his stride. The cruel tilt of his head. It was him. Even from 100 yards away. Beneath the layers of gold and age, Salas recognized the monster who had haunted his nightmares, and his opponent, the announcer bellowed. From the pits of Capua, the man who speaks only with his blade, Salas the Phantom, the gate creaked open. The sun hit Salas like a physical blow. The smell of the arena, blood, sweat, stale wine, and fear, flooded his senses. He walked out. He didn't wave. He didn't bow to the emperor's box. He walked straight toward the center of the sands, his eyes locked on General Valerius. Valerius laughed as Salas approached. The general removed his helmet to bask in the applause, handing it to a slave. And there it was. Time had wrinkled the skin. And the sun had weathered it, but the scar was unmistakable. The ugly, purple crescent moon on the left side of his neck. The world went silent for Salas. The cheering crowd faded into a dull hum. The emperor, the guards, the other gladiators, they all ceased to exist. There was only the scar. The target, "You look intense, boy," Valerius sneered, drawing his own sword. It was a masterpiece of Damascus steel, glittering in the light. "Try not to die too quickly. I have a banquet to attend tonight." Salas didn't speak. He couldn't. If he opened his mouth, a scream of 15 years of agony would tear his throat apart. He simply raised his shield and settled into a low stance. The referee blew the horn. Valerius moved fast for an old man. He lunged, a classic military thrust aimed at Salas's shoulder. It was a testing blow, meant to gauge the opponent's speed. Salas didn't block it. He stepped inside it. He deflected the blade with the rim of his shield and slammed his shoulder into Valerius's chest. The impact was like two bulls colliding. Valerius stumbled back, surprise flickering in his eyes. He had expected a fearful slave, not a battering ram. "Strong," Valerius grunted, circling to the left. "But strength without discipline is just meat waiting to be butchered." Valerius attacked again, a flurry of strikes, high, low, high, faint. He was skilled, Salas had to give him that. He fought with the precision of a man who had survived 100 battlefields. But Salas wasn't fighting like a soldier. He was fighting like a demon. He parried a strike that would have taken his head off and countered with a savage uppercut of his shield that caught Valerius under the chin. The general bit his tongue. Blood sprayed onto the golden armor. The crowd gasped. They weren't used to seeing their heroes bleed. "Who are you?" Valerius hissed, spitting blood. "You fight like you hate me." Salas pressed the attack. He swung his gladius with terrifying velocity. Clang! 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 Sparks flew as steel met steel. Salas was relentless. He was driving the general back, step by step, forcing him toward the wooden spikes that lined the perimeter of the arena. Valerius was gasping for air now, his age showing. He tried to use his shield to bash Salas, but Salas saw it coming. You have to remember, Salas had played this moment in his head 1,000,000 times. He knew every move the monster would make before he made it. Salas ducked under a wide swing, dropped his shield, and grabbed Valerius's wrist. With a twist that sounded like a dry branch snapping, he forced the general to drop his sword. Valerius cried out, falling to his knees in the dust. This was it. The moment, Salas kicked Valerius in the chest, knocking him flat onto his back. He stood over him, blocking out the sun. The shadow of the Avenger fell over the fallen conqueror. Valerius scrambled backward, his heels digging into the sand, terror finally replacing the arrogance in his eyes. He looked up at Salis and saw death. "Wait." Valerius wheezed, holding up a trembling hand. "I can pay you. I have gold. I have villas. Whatever you want." Salis stepped closer. He placed a heavy foot on Valerius's chest, pinning him to the ground. He slowly lowered the point of his sword until it was resting against the crescent moon scar. The skin there was thin, pulsing with the frantic beat of the general's heart. One push. Just 1 inch of steel, and the nightmare would be over. The ghosts of his parents would fade. The fire in his head would finally go out. "I don't want your gold," Salis rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. It was the first time he had spoken in the arena. "I want you to remember the villa on the Appian Way. 15 years ago." The boy in the fire, Valerius's eyes went wide. Recognition dawned on him. Not of Salis, but of the crime. He remembered. Of course he remembered. It was the night he made his fortune. "You." Valerius whispered. "The child. You were supposed to burn." "I did," Salis said, raising the sword high for the killing blow. "And now, I am the fire." The crowd was screaming for blood. "Kill! Kill! Kill!" The emperor gave the thumbs down. The verdict was death. Justice was a heartbeat away. Salis tightened his grip on the hilt. Every muscle in his body was coiled to strike. This was what he lived for. This was what he died for. But then, Valerius did something strange. He didn't beg. He didn't close his eyes. He looked past Salis. He looked toward the VIP box where his family sat. And he whispered one word. A name, Julia. Salis hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. He followed the general's gaze. Sitting in the front row of the box, clutching the railing with white knuckles, was a young woman. She was crying. But she wasn't looking at Valerius with the eyes of a daughter fearing for her father. She was looking at Salis. And around her neck, resting against her pale skin, was a necklace. A simple, wooden pendant carved in the shape of a wolf. Salis froze. The sword hovered inches from Valerius's throat. "You have to understand, that necklace wasn't Roman gold. It wasn't a jewel bought with blood money. It was a crude, clumsy thing carved by a 10-year-old boy for his mother on her birthday, 2 days before she was murdered. He had watched the commander rip it off her dead body. He had watched him put it in his pocket as a trophy, and now, this girl, this daughter of the monster, was wearing it. Why? The question hit Salis harder than any spear. Why would the daughter of a butcher wear the trinket of a victim? And why was she looking at Salis not with hatred, but with recognition? Valerius saw the hesitation. He saw Salis staring at the necklace. The general began to laugh, a wet, bloody gurgle. "You think you know the story, boy?" Valerius coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. "You think you know what happened that night? You know nothing." Salis pressed the sword tip into the scar, drawing a single bead of blood. "Speak," he growled. "Before I cut the words out of you." "That necklace," Valerius gasped, wincing in pain. "She wears it because she thinks it belonged to her brother." Salis's mind reeled. Brother? He had no sister. He was an only child. The world was spinning. The heat of the arena felt suddenly cold. "Look at her," Valerius hissed. "Look at her eyes. Do they look like mine? Or do they look like hers?" Salis looked back at the girl. Really looked at her. Beneath the Roman makeup, beneath the silk and the jewels, he saw it. The shape of the nose. The curve of the jaw. The deep, sorrowful brown eyes. They weren't Valerius's eyes, they were his mother's eyes. The sword did not move. It remained hovering inches from the jugular, a steel promise of death that Salis could not bring himself to keep. You have to imagine the confusion that rippled through the 50,000 spectators. They had paid for blood. They had paid to see the phantom butcher the general. They didn't understand why the executioner was staring at a girl in the stands with eyes full of tears. But Salos wasn't in the Colosseum anymore. He was back in the burning villa. He was looking at the baby sister he thought had died in her crib. He was looking at the necklace that he had carved with his own clumsy, 10-year-old hands. "She doesn't know," Valerius whispered, his voice a poisonous hiss rising from the dirt. "She thinks I saved her from the fire. She thinks I am her savior." Her father, Salos felt the ground sway beneath his feet. The rage that had fueled him for 15 years was suddenly choked by a sickening nausea. Valerius hadn't just killed his parents. He had stolen the only thing left of them. He had taken a sacred memory and twisted it into a lie. He had raised Salos's own flesh and blood to love the monster who destroyed their family. "If you kill me," Valerius smiled, seeing the hesitation, knowing he had found the armor's chink, "you kill the only father she has ever known. Look at her, boy. Look at her face. If you strike me down, she will hate you until her last breath. You will be the villain in her story, just as I am the villain in yours." Salos looked at Julia. She was standing now, leaning over the railing, her face a mask of terror. "Father," she screamed. The word hit Salos like a physical blow. "Father." She called the butcher father. The emperor stood up in his box. He was bored. This was taking too long. "Kill him!" Nero bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Finish it, phantom, or I will send the lions to finish you both." The crowd picked up the chant. "Death! Death! Death!" The sound was a physical weight, pressing down on Salos's shoulders. He had a choice. He could plunge the sword down, end the nightmare, and take his revenge. It would be justice. It would be righteous. But as he looked at the scar on Valerius's neck, and then at the necklace on Julia's chest, he realized something that broke him. If he killed Valerius now, in front of her, he wasn't saving her. He was destroying her world. He would just be another man with a sword, taking away someone she loved. He would become the very thing he hated. Salos's hand trembled. The veins in his arm stood out like cords. You know that feeling when you have to scream but you can't? When the injustice is so great it feels like it's burning your insides? Salos looked down at Valerius, who was grinning, confident in his psychological victory. "You lose, boy." Valerius whispered. "Even with a sword at my throat, you lose." Salos closed his eyes. He took a breath that tasted of dust and copper. Then, he opened his eyes, and they were no longer burning with rage. They were cold. Dead calm. "No," Salos said softly. "I don't lose." He stood up. He stepped back. And then, he did the unthinkable. He opened his hand, the sword fell, it hit the sand with a dull thud that seemed louder than the screaming crowd. Salos turned his back on Valerius. He turned his back on 15 years of hate. He looked up at the emperor, raised his empty hands, and shook his head. He was refusing to kill. He was refusing the game. The crowd went silent. This was an insult to the emperor. This was suicide, but Valerius didn't see mercy. He saw an opening. You have to understand the nature of a snake. A snake doesn't understand gratitude, it only understands opportunity. As Salos turned away, Valerius scrambled for the dropped sword. His hand closed around the hilt. His eyes flashed with a maniacal triumph. He didn't care about honor. He didn't care about the rules. He just wanted to win. The slave. Valerius screamed, lunging at Salos's unprotected back. "No." Julia screamed from the stands, a sound of pure betrayal. She saw it. She saw her father attack an unarmed man who had just spared his life. Salos didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Remember. He was the phantom. He had eyes in the back of his head. He heard the shift in the sand. He heard the intake of breath. He heard the rustle of the golden armor. At the very last second, Salus dropped to one knee. The blade swung over his head, slicing the air where his neck had been a microsecond before. Salus spun, driving his shoulder into Valerius's gut, knocking the wind out of him. Valerius stumbled back, flailing, but he didn't drop the sword. He slashed wildly, desperate, looking less like a general and more like a madman. Salus caught the wrist of the sword hand. He twisted. But he didn't break it this time. He pulled Valerius close, face to face. Look at her. Salus roared, forcing Valerius to look up at the VIP box. Look at her eyes. She sees you now. She sees what you are. Valerius looked up. Julia wasn't crying anymore. She was staring at him with horror. She had seen him try to stab a man in the back. She had seen the monster beneath the mask. The illusion was shattered. Valerius snarled, tearing his eyes away. I don't care what she sees. I am a general of Rome. I do not yield to filth like you. He pulled a hidden dagger from his belt with his free hand, a cowardly, illegal weapon in a duel, and stabbed at Salus's ribs. Salus blocked it with his forearm, the blade tearing a long gash through his skin. The pain was blinding, but Salus didn't let go. The Emperor was laughing now. This was the brutality he wanted. Salus realized then that Valerius would never stop. As long as he breathed, he was a poison. Salus had tried mercy. He had tried to be the better man. But you cannot save a rabid dog. You can only put it down. Salus headbutted Valerius, shattering the general's nose. As Valerius reeled back, blinded by pain and blood, Salus swept his legs. Valerius hit the ground hard, the dagger flying from his hand. Salus picked up his own sword from the sand. He stood over Valerius. Do it. Valerius spat, blood bubbling from his mouth. She will still hate you. She might, Salus said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the arena. But she will be free. Salus didn't hesitate this time. He didn't torture. He didn't gloat. He drove the sword down. It was a clean, soldier's death. The blade pierced the heart, ending the life of the general, the monster, the thief of lives. Valerius gasped once, his hand clawing at the sand. And then went still. Salus stood there, his chest heaving, the blood dripping from his arm mixing with the blood of his enemy. He didn't raise his arms in victory. He didn't look at the Emperor. He looked straight at Julia. He reached into his tunic, the only personal item he was allowed to keep, and pulled out something small. It was a wooden carving. A wolf. Identical to the one she wore, but this one was the other half. The pup to her mother wolf. He held it up. Julia froze. Her hand went to her own necklace. She looked at the wooden wolf in the arena, then at the one on her chest. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. The memories she had suppressed, the fire, the smoke. The boy who told her to hide, came rushing back. She didn't scream. She stood up, wiped the tears from her face, and placed her hand over her heart, looking directly at Salus. She nodded. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a hug. But it was an acknowledgement. I know you. I remember you. Salus nodded back. He dropped the sword on Valerius's corpse. You defy me? The Emperor's voice cut through the moment. You kill my general. You turn your back on me. Salus looked up at the golden box. I didn't kill a general, he shouted, his voice carrying to the top rows. I executed a murderer. And I am done with your games. He turned and walked toward the gate of death, the exit for the bodies. But he walked upright. The guards blocked his path. Spears were lowered. The crowd held its breath. Was the Emperor going to order his death? Then, a single rose flew from the stands. Then another. Then a laurel wreath. The crowd began to cheer. Not for the blood. But for the justice. They had seen the treachery of Valerius. They had seen the honor of the phantom. Let him go. Let him go. Nero looked at the mob. He looked at the angry faces of the people. He knew that killing Salas now would start a riot he couldn't control. He waved his hand dismissively. "Get him out of my sight." The guards stepped aside. Salas walked into the dark tunnel. He was bleeding, he was exhausted. And he had nothing to his name but a wooden wolf in his pocket. But as he walked out into the cool evening air of Rome, he felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years, the fire in his head was gone. The ghosts were silent, he waited by the gladiator's exit. Hours passed. The stars came out. Finally, a hooded figure emerged from the crowd of nobles leaving the stadium. She stopped in front of him. She pulled back her hood. Julia looked at his face, the burns, the scars, the eyes that mirrored her own. She reached out and touched the fresh wound on his arm. "He told me you died," she whispered. "I did," Salas said, taking her hand. "But I came back." They didn't speak of the years lost. They didn't speak of the monster who had raised her. They simply walked away from the Colosseum, side by side, two survivors of the same fire, walking into a future that finally belonged to them. This is Marcus. Thank you for watching. Salas chose to drop his sword to save his sister's heart, even if it meant risking his own life. I want to ask you, is there anyone in your life you would risk everything to save? Or do you think revenge is the only way to find peace? Let me know in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories of glory, betrayal, and redemption. Until next time, keep fighting.